In this video, I'll explain my varnishing process for my oil paintings. I start off with a clean dish. I always use the same dish every time, I just clean it afterwards. And I do a mixture of Gamblin's Gamvar of Satin and Gloss finish, although I do put a little bit more gloss, so it's not quite a 50-50% mixture. And these are the two specifically, so you can get them. And I take a varnish brush, this one's specifically by Gamblin and Treacle, and I just kind of mix that real quick. Then with my completely dry painting, that's important, I do one stripe at the top of a painting, and then with the same brush, do not redip unless it's absolutely necessary. I drag down the varnish from that top line all the way throughout the painting. And this is kept at real time just to show you how fast it takes me. I pull down the varnish kind of slowly because when you pull it too quickly, little air bubbles form. And while I think those self-level, it is important for me to have the best quality of my piece. And now, I'm not sure if you can see this, but there's actually too much varnish on my brush. So when I'm going back to do these lines, I get this little ridge, and if you don't correct that, it'll dry like that. So you can see here, I've slowed it down, there's a little ridge towards the top half of my painting where there's excess varnish. So what I do is I'm just wiping this off on the side of that dish and going back. I did not redip the brush, I actually just wiped off the excess. So now going that last horizontal way again, I'm just dragging the brush to kind of finish the top coat, make it just more cohesive and get rid of that excess varnished line. And so now once you think your painting is varnished, it's important to kind of examine it with the light. And I don't see any lines, so that one's good. Same process with this. I start off with one line, and then without redipping, unless I just absolutely have to, I drag that line of varnish all the way down through my painting. And again, this is my real time. The dragging motion is a bit slow, but I find it very helpful. I have not had a problem with any air bubbles forming and staying in the final piece when I do drag it very carefully. And then once more in the other direction, in the perpendicular direction, just to, I guess, smooth it out, make sure the distribution is even, as well as it kind of gets rid of any ridges from that first pass, like in that first example. In this one, I did not have any excess varnish, which was good, so I did not have to go back again and clean off my brush. And so once I think I'm done, I examine it to the light, and if I don't see any ridges and everything looks covered, I call that a success. It is important to let your oil paintings dry flat. Don't put them back on your easel to dry, even though that might be more space friendly. It is not good for your varnish. If anything, it can make your varnish slowly seep down and puddle, and you have like an uneven finish, and some part can be more shiny than the other, which is not ideal. Another thing about varnish that I think is important to know is that you should not put more than one coat of varnish. I know the appeal to have like a thick, even, shiny coat on top of your painting might be there, but varnish is supposed to be to protect your painting, and while that seems counterproductive, the layers are supposed to be thin, so a restorer can come back and effectively remove the layer of varnish if they need to fix anything on the painting. So it is important not to go back and revarnish a painting, even though the appeal might be there. It is not good for its archival qualities. Now, once again, I examine this to the light. Now you can see some of this texture showing through. That is not the varnish, that is the texture of the actual piece, and that is totally fine. And I had some extra varnish from those three paintings that I varnished, so I thought I might as well just varnish this piece that I did a while ago. This is the recreation of the SpongeBob painting Bold and Brash. This is done in oil paints, and I was experimenting with some palette knife texture as well as some different mediums. So this is not something I usually would do, but it was a practice piece. And I do the same process for this. Just slowly drag the brush. It's important not to put your fingers in the varnish. I know that sounds silly, but just during the process, it could happen on accident. And also, while you're varnishing, do try to get little hairs out as you see them. And now when I'm examining this to the light, I don't know if you can tell here, but I could tell in person that a little bit of it was uneven. So I went back and re-leveled it, redistributed the varnish, and after this pass, it looked very successful, and I set this one out to dry properly. And it takes about 18 to 24 hours to dry, mind you, if you use Gamvar from Gamblin. So I've also included how to properly clean your Gamvar, or really any kind of varnish brush you choose. I use Gamsol, and I have this Silicoil container. It already contains some Gamsol, but I was topping it off. It's kind of hard to tell, but the Gamsol that was in there was just slightly over the coil, and I would like to have a little more. So you just take your brush and you sweep it back and forth over the coil. You don't want to be too aggressive with it, but you do want the Gamsol to penetrate the bristles closer to the base. While using any sort of varnish, you don't really need to dip your brush too much, so you don't have too much problems with any of the varnish settling in the base, but it is important. And then when it looks clean, you just wipe the excess off the side, and then you take some sort of paper towel, preferably something lintless, and just kind of pat your Gamvar brush dry. I will add though, I actually have to do this twice. The very next day when it is dry, it is a bit stiff and gummy. Your brush is not ruined. Just do this process one more time and it works perfectly, and I've used this brush for years.